Web3 gaming was supposed to change everything. Real ownership, real economies. A world where players weren't just spending time in games, but earning from them, shaping them, and even co-owning them. For a while, it looked like that future had arrived. Billions of dollars flowed in, DAOs formed, entire ecosystems spun up seemingly overnight, all promising to break the cycle of predatory game studios and build a new player-first era. And then it kind of fell apart. Players left. Projects folded. Some of the most promising teams like Treasure DAO, a project once considered a centerpiece of the movement, are now cutting staff, shutting down initiatives, and trying to stretch their runway just to survive. And they aren't alone. Across the board, the Web3 gaming space is going through a massive reset. So, what happened? How did something with so much momentum lose its grip so quickly? My name is Danilo, and today, we're diving into one of the biggest, quote, what went wrong stories in Web3. Not just to look back, but to understand what future builders and players need to get right if this space is ever going to move forward. If that sounds interesting to you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss future crypto updates. Alright, let's get into it. To understand why Web3 gaming collapsed, we need to rewind to what made it so exciting in the first place. At its core, the pitch was simple but powerful. For decades, gamers spent real time and money building up in-game assets, whether that be skins, items, characters, without ever truly owning them. Web3 flipped that model on its head. Suddenly, your gear wasn't locked to one platform. It lived on-chain. You could trade it, sell it, or even move it between games. Combine that with the rise of play to earn, and just for a moment, gaming wasn't just entertainment. It was a job, an investment, and a new kind of digital economy. It resonated and fast. Players saw a chance to turn their time into income, and developers saw new monetization models that didn't rely on loot boxes or exploitative microtransactions. Crypto native founders jumped in with bold promises, interoperable assets, decentralized governance, and worlds where power shifted from publishers to players. It was the kind of story Web3 loved. Disruptive, idealistic, and easy to rally behind. Projects like Axie Infinity brought that vision to life. At its peak, Axie wasn't just a game, it was a global phenomenon. In parts of Southeast Asia, players were earning more through Axie than from traditional jobs. Entire scholarship programs emerged to onboard new users. For many, it felt like proof that Web3 could create sustainable, community-driven economies. That early success kicked off a frenzy. VCs poured in, eager to find the next breakout hit. Teams scrambled to launch, quote, Axie killers, promising deeper mechanics, better graphics, or smarter token models. DAOs began forming to support gaming ecosystems. New chains and subnets were spun up specifically for game deployment. It looked like the entire industry was gearing up for a full-blown revolution, not just in how games were built, but in how they were owned, funded, and played. But even in those peak moments, something wasn't sitting right. Few people were asking whether these games were built to last. Fewer still were asking whether they were actually fun. The cracks started to show sooner than most expected. For all the promises of ownership and open economies, the actual experience of playing most Web3 games fell flat. Many of them weren't really games at all. They were token ecosystems wrapped in minimal gameplay loops. Click-to-earn mechanics, idle farming, repetitive battles with no progression. It became clear that for a lot of projects, the token was the product, not the gameplay. That design choice created a dangerous feedback loop. Players weren't logging on because they loved the game. They were there to earn, and as soon as the token price dropped or the payouts slowed down, they left. Retention fell off a cliff. Instead of building games that could last years, most projects burned out in months, and on top of all of this, the onboarding experience was a nightmare. For crypto native users, jumping through 5 steps to buy a token and connect to a wallet might have felt normal, but for average gamers, it was exhausting. Getting started often required bridging assets, swapping tokens, setting up a non-custodial wallet, and understanding gas fees just to play something that they felt like was a downgraded browser game. Worse still, many teams rebuilt the same walled gardens that Web3 was supposed to disrupt. Instead of embracing open standards or interoperable assets, games locked players into siloed ecosystems. NFTs weren't portable across platforms. Quote, decentralized governance often boiled down to a handful of insiders calling the shots. It started to feel like the same old systems, just dressed in blockchain branding. And when things stopped working, most teams didn't communicate. They didn't pivot, they just kind of vanished. Discords went quiet, Twitter accounts stopped posting, community members were left holding tokens with no utility and NFTs with no future. And by the end of 2023, the initial magic had worn off. What was supposed to be the next gaming revolution had, for many players, turned into a mix of frustration, confusion, and regret. As the gameplay fell short and the users dropped off, the money started drying up too. In the early days, it was a gold rush. Investors were throwing cash at anything with a token, a trailer, and a half-decent pitch deck. The logic was simple. If Axie could reach a $3 billion valuation off a simple battle system and cartoon creatures, imagine what a more polished version could do. The result was a wave of quote Axie killers, all promising to fix the flaws and scale the model. But most of them never made it past a beta, and once the players started leaving, the money did too. By 2024, the sentiment had shifted. According to recent reports, blockchain gaming investments dropped 38% compared to previous year. It wasn't just a slowdown, it was a clear signal. The market was no longer buying the hype. VCs had seen enough half-baked launches, unsustainable token models, and overpromised roadmaps to realize that more money wasn't going to fix the problem. Even Sky Mavis, the team behind Axie Infinity, acknowledged it. Co-founder Jeffrey Zerlin said that in a recent interview that while funding hasn't dried up completely, it's a different landscape now. Investors are more cautious, they're asking harder questions. It's no longer about riding the next trend, it's about looking for projects that actually have a path to sustainability. The shift wasn't just about capital, it was about confidence. Big name firms that once celebrated their gaming portfolios started going quiet. DAOs that had once backed entire ecosystems began winding down. And some projects still managed to raise funds, but the days of $20 million rounds for a white paper and some early gameplay footage were over. And in the absence of fresh capital, many teams began to unravel faster than most expected. With the hype gone and the capital pulling back, the fallout became impossible to ignore. Teams that once raised millions were suddenly laying off staff. Promising projects quietly shut down their servers, and communities that once had rallied around shared missions were left with half-finished games and token charts in freefall. What started as a market correction quickly turned personal for the builders, the players, and everyone who believed in the early vision. One of the clearest examples came from Treasure DAO. At one point, they were seen as a flagship for decentralized game publishing on Arbitrum, but in 2025, they announced a sweeping restructure to cut costs and extend the runway. 15 contributors were let go. Game publishing support was halted. Even their in-house chain, the Treasure Chain, was sunset. In a single announcement, they effectively walked back to the entire foundation they'd been building for over 2 years. The ripple effects were immediate. One of their top partners, The Beacon, announced they were leaving the Treasure ecosystem entirely and encouraged players to migrate their assets elsewhere. For players who had bought into that ecosystem, not just financially but emotionally even, this was a brutal moment. And this wasn't just an isolated case. Across the space, similar stories played out. Developers ghosted their communities, roadmaps went silent, tokens lost 90 to 99% of their value. People weren't just losing money, they were losing faith. And the most frustrating part? A lot of these projects didn't fail because they were hacked or rugged. They failed because the core assumptions around growth, retention, and token incentives just didn't hold up. And when things got hard, many teams didn't adapt, they folded. It was a tough pill to swallow, especially for the players and community members who genuinely believed that they were building something different, something better. So, what can builders and players actually learn from all this? Looking back, the collapse of Web3 gaming wasn't caused by one single flaw. It was death by 1,000 misaligned priorities. Most projects focused on launching tokens instead of designing experiences. Gameplay was treated as secondary, something to be layered on after the marketplace, the staking mechanism, and the NFT drop were already live. It created an environment where the value of a game was measured by floor price and APY, not whether anyone actually wanted to play it. The incentive models, too, were fundamentally broken. Instead of rewarding players for skill or creativity, they rewarded whoever could extract the most value the fastest. That led to unsustainable growth and short-term thinking. When the music stopped, there was no reason for most players to stick around. Trust was another major casualty. Too many teams overpromised and underdelivered. And when things didn't go as planned, they vanished. No transparency, no communication, no accountability. For a space that claimed to be about community ownership and openness, that disconnect was hard to ignore. If Web3 gaming is going to make a comeback, it needs to rebuild from the ground up. That starts with making games that are actually fun, games people would play even if there were no tokens attached. It also means designing onboarding that feels intuitive and seamless. Most importantly though, it requires long-term thinking. Projects can't just launch with hype. They need to prove they can sustain an economy, grow a real user base, and keep building when the market cools off. There are some teams quietly working on that next chapter, but they're not promising quick flips or triple-digit yields. They're focused on gameplay, polish, and user experience. Whether or not they succeed is still unclear, but the ones who learn from version 1 will still have a serious head start. Web3 gaming didn't fail because the technology wasn't ready. It failed because the industry chased hype over substance. It promised players a revolution, but delivered speculation, broken economies, and games most people didn't want to play. Still, that doesn't mean the idea is dead. If anything, we're just past the first draft. And, like any good game, maybe it needed a few rough betas before something playable could emerge. The projects that survive this cycle will be the ones that took the hit, learned the lessons, and decided to rebuild with a different mindset. One that values experience over extraction and players over price charts. Whether Web3 gaming deserves a second chance is still up for debate, but if it does, it'll be because a new wave of builders took the time to understand what went wrong and decided not to repeat it. Now, let me ask you, have you played a Web3 game that actually felt fun, or at least showed real potential? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear what stood out and why. And if you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.